Begin. We're in chapter 6, and although I introduced the title of this evening as How to Know if Something is Holy, how can you tell if something is holy? The truth of the matter is I'm not even sure if we're going to get to that point in this evening's show, because I know how we roll, right? I know how sometimes it takes time to get through a concept. So let's just rehash where we are. We've spent quite a fair amount of time talking about the neshama, the godly soul, the part of us that is the real self. Somebody made a very insightful comment to me last night where they said that the greatest cause of stress is our inability to be ourselves, which is very insightful. And from a Jewish perspective, to understand what it means to be ourselves means to be our true selves, to be able to have access to our neshama, to the depths of our soul. So we've spoken in chapters 2, 3, 4, 5 about the power of the neshama, about our ability to connect with Hashem internally, inherently, intrinsically because of the nature of our neshama, and the tools that are at our disposal, which were Torah and mitzvahs, are Torah and mitzvahs. And we've discovered the unique way in which Torah and mitzvahs creates this bond between ourselves and Hashem. So that's all the good news. And then last week we started chapter 6, which opens with the line, Ze leumas ze asa Elokim. It's a verse in Tanakh which says that the way that Hashem has designed the world is that everything that exists in the world has a counterpart. So whatever is in the holy reality has a counterpart in the unholy reality. And they're quite similar in nature, almost like a mirror image. A great example of this, by the way, is the Gemara talks about the fact that there are apes who look so similar to humans and they behave in a way that is so similar to humans, but very obviously they are not humans. So, and not to say that apes are bad, but it's this trying to emulate, and in various places in Jewish mysticism we talk about how the forces of evil, the negative energies in the world, are kekoif bifnei adam. They're like an ape trying to emulate a human being. So they look the part, and they make similar movements, and they say similar things, and they operate using a similar system. But fundamentally, they're really different. So this is the chapter that takes us back to the animal soul, or the animating soul, the nefesh hachiyunis, or as we call it, nefesh habahamis, the animal soul. And we start to unpack it. Let's understand what it is, and how does it operate, and what are we supposed to do with this part of ourselves? And that's where we'll eventually land up going, is we'll talk about the relationship between the two souls and the influence that the neshama should have, and please God will have, over the animalistic soul. So let's continue our exploration over here of this soul of ours, which is called the nefesh hachiyunis, or the nefesh habahamis, the animal soul, or the animating soul. Let's just analyze it and understand a little bit more about it, because it'll be very useful for us. It will help us to appreciate the inner workings of ourselves, which is very, very useful. So what did we say last week? We said, I'm going to start from the beginning because we didn't do a lot of text last week. So the chapter begins by saying, the way that Hashem designed the world is that there'll be one reality that has a counterpart in a different opposite reality. Or there'll be a force for good that will have a counterpart force which is not good. And that's the way Hashem designed the world. It's not accidental. It's not a rebellion against God, as perhaps other theologies would suggest. This is how Hashem created the world. It was intentional that there should be a force for good that is met head-on by a force for obstruction. I don't want to use the word force for bad, because it's not what we're going to be talking about over here, but there's this movement in the direction that Hashem would like us to move, and there's this pushback against that direction, and in our day-to-day life, this pushback comes from within ourselves. And people are forever blaming circumstance, right? There's this that happened, there's that happened. And the reality is, a lot of the pushback to our spiritual development comes from within ourselves. So now let's make the comparison. Key. The reason we call these ze leumas ze, which basically sounds like it's a mirror image, is for the following reason. In exactly the same way as the godly soul, as we've already defined in chapter 3, Kulula is comprised me-eser spherois kedoshos. The operating system of the neshama is 10 facets. We call those 10 facets the 10 spherois, which effectively means 10 different expressions of holy energy. It effectively means 10 different facets of expression. It effectively means 10 different stories. The word sphera comes from the word lispor, sipur, to tell a story. So there are 10 different ways, effectively, that the neshama can tell its story. Sephira also comes from the word to shine, like a sapphire, which is a precious gem, and it shines to indicate that these different elements of our soul, that's what allows us to shine. So if you had to break down the operating system of the neshama, otherwise known as the nefesh elokis, the godly soul, it's all about the interrelated functions of the 10 holy, healthy, wholesome, bright elements called the 10 sephiros. That's the operating system of the neshama. Then, that was in chapter 3, and in chapter 4 we learned, umislabeshes bishloisha levushim kedoshim. We also learned that the nature of the nefesh elokis, the godly soul, is that it uses these interfaces in order to engage with the world, thought, speech, and action. We call them the 3 garments of the soul. So we said there are 10 faculties of the soul, and there are 3 garments of the soul. And as long as you're talking about the neshama, the nefesh elokis, the godly soul, then whatever garments or whatever interfaces it uses are the healthiest that you can get, the holiest that you can get. Shloisha levushim kedoshim, 3 holy expressions of interaction with the world. So, when the neshama is using the process of thought, what's it thinking? Holy thoughts. So the technology of thought, when it is used by the neshama, will be thinking about Hashem's greatness, about concepts within Torah, about the value of the soul, about how to help somebody else. That would be the motivation of the neshama when using thought. So at those times, thought will be holy. When the neshama uses the technology called speech, the words that come out will be words of holiness, of Torah, of prayer, of encouragement, of love, healthy love. Because when the neshama uses the garment called speech, it uses the holy variety of the garment called speech. And of course, the same applies to action as well. So when the neshama is the one that is motivating human action, those actions will be completely aligned with what Hashem wants. It's that kind of action that the soul will follow, because it's an expression of holiness. Anytime the neshama is engaged in anything, it will be holy. So that phrase is used now twice. We say the neshama is made out of spheros, elements that are kedoshos, that are holy. And we said that the neshama uses an interface with a 3-fold interface with the world, which is called levushim kedoshim, holy. At this point, this would be an appropriate time for us to start to ask, what is holy? Because we think we know what holy is. We all think, I know exactly what holy is. And then ask yourself, can you define it? Do we know how to explain what holy is? We just have the sense in our minds, of a glow or a halo or wings or harps or, spiritual music happening in the background, or perhaps there's just this light. That's what we think when we say words like holy. Now, the reality is, as you can see, I'm sitting by an Aron Kodesh, and behind that curtain there are Torahs, and we know that the Torahs are holy. Now, do they shine? Do they have halos? When we open up the ark, is there harp music that starts to automatically play? Well, I don't know, maybe in some less than orthodox places, maybe that is what happens. I don't know. So what exactly is holy? This is going to be a very important part of our conversation in this chapter and going forward. And it's going to be an important conversation for 2 reasons. Firstly, of course, we need a working definition for holiness. If we're going to speak about holiness as an aspiration, if we're going to call ourselves a holy nation, as Hashem does, if we're going to say that there are certain items in Jewish tradition or certain days on the calendar that are holy, we need to know what that is. And the big mistake that so many people make is to believe that holy and spiritual are synonymous. And that's inaccurate. So in our exploration of what exactly holy means, we're going to identify that there are many spiritual things around that are decidedly spiritual, and that does not mean that they're holy. So that's an important consideration. There's another reason that we have to know what holy is, because only by defining what holy is can we have an assessment of what unholy is. As Jewish people, what we're supposed to be doing in our lives is consistently trying to become more holy. Kadoshim to you, as the verse says. Hashem tells the Jewish people, I want you to be holy. Ki am kadosh ata. You are a holy nation. Therefore, there's certain behaviors that you have to adhere to. So our aspiration has to be holy. And because we know that Judaism is a two-channel system, there's a channel of proactive mitzvahs, the 248 proactive mitzvahs that bring us to a state of holiness, and equally there are 365 responsive or retractive mitzvahs, things that we have to avoid so that we don't become unholy. Now, when people hear the word unholy, they're usually associated with contaminated, with unclean. That's why people get quite offended if you say that a person might be at a certain stage in their life unholy or impure. People are, whoa, what are you talking about? I'm a hygienic person. What do you mean I'm impure? So we need to define these things. What does holy mean and what does unholy mean? Because those become the two arenas within which all of our spiritual development happens. Running from the unholy in order to become holy. So before we can do that, I've just, now that we've drawn our attention to the fact that there is something called holy, that the neshama is made of components that are all holy, so now by comparison, zeh leumas zeh, the one counterparts the other, counterbalances the other, or even challenges and opposes the other. So let's have a look at what the other is. The nefesh hachiyunis. Let's have a look. Kach, likewise, hanefesh de sitra achra. Now, we began to talk about this a little bit last week. The first way that we're introduced to this dimension of soul, which is called the animalistic or the animating or the impulsive soul. Maybe impulsive is a good word because it really speaks to the reality of the soul. So the impulsive soul, here he calls it the soul of sitra achra. Now, sitra achra is an Aramaic term, and the direct translation of it means the other side. Now, that's exactly a big element of this chapter, and one of the most important things we have to know about Jewish spirituality. There are effectively two sides. There's a side that is holy. That's the side we belong to. That's where we should direct our focus and our energies. And then there's a sitra achra. There's another side, an alternate side, different side, opposing side. And you know, it's interesting because the play on words in Hebrew is very powerful. Acher means another. So sitra achra in Aramaic would be the same thing as saying in Hebrew tzad acher, another side. But it's very deeply linked to the word, and you can hear it phonetically, to the word achor. Achor means behind. So sitra achra is the side which is behind. In other words, there are two kinds of relationships that a person can have. There's the ideal relationship, which we all aspire to in all of our relationships, which is called, in the language of Torah, ponim el ponim. In English, face to face. Face to face. Now, in today's wonderful world of technology, we have replaced normal human contact with just face to face. Because that's all you see on the screen, just the face. That's not what the Torah meant when it spoke about a relationship that is ponim el ponim. Face to face means you sit across the table from somebody else. You sit in proximity where you can see them. Not just see their image in a two-dimensional way on a screen, but to see them, to see their micro-expressions, to see their reactions, to see their body language. That is the way you enrich a relationship. Now, thank God, I think everybody, pretty much everybody who's on the Zoom right now, maybe not every single person, most of the people on the Zoom right now, thank God, were spared the the concept of online dating. We were spared that experience. Where from the old days, when people dated, they actually went physically to a place and sat and actually had a conversation. And the only thing that could perhaps distract them was when the waiter came. But in today's world, where you have this concept of online dating and Zoom dating, although it has a place, and it certainly can initiate some element of contact between two people, it's not panim el panim. It's not a face-to-face experience. So the ultimate kind of relationship is face-to-face. What's the worst kind of relationship? Is back-to-back. As they say, it's the furthest that two people could be from each other. Is standing back-to-back. No connection, no eye contact, no meaningful dialogue, looking in completely different directions, which implies that you have completely different objectives. That is called achoir el achoir, back to back. So this soul, that is the animating soul, keeps a human being alive. It originates from sitra achra, from a different side, meaning to say it is not naturally aligned with the world of holiness. It's not naturally looking in that direction. It's not naturally in a face-to-face relationship with God. It's naturally in a relationship that will turn its back on God. Yes, I know, Hashem, you want me to do this right now, but my impulsive side says, I'd much rather be, fill in the gaps, sleeping in, playing golf, going fishing, having breakfast, whatever the case might be. So that's the nature, sitra achra. It's always focused on the other side. Whatever Hashem wants from us, this part of us is naturally polarized to go the other way. But then he qualifies for us. This world of sitra achra is a very complex reality, like every reality. Nothing's absolutely straightforward. It's not just so simple, black and white. So it's a very broad and layered reality called sitra achra. Within that reality, there are dimensions that are not identical. So he's going to give us a phrase over here that we're not going to define at this point. In the next chapter, we'll come back and redefine this particular phrase that he's using now. For which reason, now we're just going to translate it in a pretty generic way. Mi klipois noiga. So now we've got two clues as to the point of origin, which of course tells us the nature of this other soul, this impulsive soul. Number one, it comes from sitra achra, meaning to say it's focused in the opposite direction of where Hashem would like us to go. Number one. Number two, it's from klipois, and more specifically klipois noiga. So like I said, we're going to discuss the concept of klipa in quite a lot of detail later on, at the end of this chapter, and then in the beginning of the next chapter. But suffice it to say this, the direct translation of the word klipa is a shell. A better word for us to use in our terms would be a wrapping. So, for example, when kids play pass the parcel and the music goes and they're passing around the thing and it's got many layers of newspaper or wrapping paper, whatever the case is. And then when the music stops, they've got to rip off some paper and maybe they'll find something valuable inside. That's like klippas. Klippas are the things that create layers of obscuring the value in our world. So let's just use one example that we could all relate to. And that is money. So, is money good or is money bad? Now, it depends who you ask, right? If you ask people who have money, they'll tell you it's good. If you ask people who, God forbid, don't have money, they're always very quick to say money is the root of all evil, because it's great to say when you don't have any. And it makes you feel a little bit better about the fact that somebody else has money, right? The Torah's answer is money is neither good nor bad. If it has many layers around it that block us from seeing how money could be used as Hashem wants to, then money would be bad. If we successfully peel away those layers and come to understand and appreciate that money is not just simply so that I can enjoy life more, but money is there to service Hashem's objectives for the world, well, then I've discovered the value in the money and it becomes something valuable, useful, and possibly even holy. So that's the principle called klipois noiga, which means that your initial engagement, your initial interaction with whatever the thing is that is klippos noiga is, it doesn't look like it has holy value. But when you scratch the surface, when you dig a little further, you'll discover that actually it does. So these are valuable things for us to know about our nefesh habahamis, about our impulsive, animalistic soul. On the one hand, its point of origin is sitra achra. It does not come from a healthy place. It does not come from a place that is naturally aligned with what Hashem wants. To the contrary, it comes from a place that pushes back by nature. And it comes from a reality of klippa, which means that they're blinkers, there are blinds that cover over the value and the opportunity. Yet at the same time, it's really important for us to know that it has potential. So peel away enough layers or train the animal and you discover great potential. Now, that's by way of introduction. Remember, we're making a comparison over here. We're saying that you have zeh leumas zeh, which implies that whatever you find on the one side will be balanced by a similar system on the other side. So we've got the neshama that is on the side of holiness, which is comprised of a system of 10 spheros, 10 soul faculties, and it uses 3 levushim, 3 interfaces to engage with the world. So now we've got to identify something similar on the other side when we talk about this impulsive soul. However, before we do that, one more piece of information, that is the location. Where does this soul live? So what does he tell us? Hameluveshes bedam ha'adam. This soul, this impulsive, animal-like soul of ours, lives in the bloodstream. So what happens, God forbid, if a person loses a lot of blood? They can't survive. Why not? Because the bloodstream is the interface that allows that animal soul to live in this body. If it doesn't have that interface, it can't live in this body. And you remember we spoke about this already in chapter 1. In chapter 1, he quoted the verse in the Torah that tells us, Ki nefesh habosar badom hi. The soul of the flesh is in the blood. Notice, it doesn't say the soul is in the blood. The soul of the flesh, in other words, the part of our spiritual makeup that is completely responsible for the survival of our physical selves, that soul is in the blood. Now, there's more to this, right? Let's talk about blood for a moment. Because blood and our experience of blood tells a lot about our experience in life. What do I mean by that? So, for example, let's start with a metaphoric statement that we're all familiar with. What do we say when somebody is really angry? Even if we're angry, what do we say? It made my blood boil. That's the expression, right? What happens if a person gets a terrible fright? I feel like my blood froze. What happens when you want to describe an individual who is completely apathetic or has no sensitivity to other people? What do we call him? Cold-blooded. When we want to describe passion, we could say it runs through my veins. So what we see is that in the language that we use, without even thinking about it, we very often refer to any kind of strong emotional response with a metaphor of blood. Isn't that interesting? We just use them as turns of phrases. We don't necessarily think about it. But these things are not accidental or incidental. It's because that is the human experience. The way Hashem has designed us, our heart is the first organ that reacts to emotional change. And our heart then pumps blood through the rest of the body, so you can feel that change in different parts of the body. So a person can literally feel like their blood froze or their blood boils, depending on what the particular circumstance might be. For that reason, both the organ called the heart and the blood are both used in Jewish mystical teachings as representation of the barometer of our emotional state. So when you say that the soul, this nefesh abahamis, this impulsive animal-like soul, is in our blood, that already gives us a major hint into how the soul operates It's impulsive and emotive. It's got the blood elements to it. It's an emotive part of who we are. Easily excited, easily angered. If it's not given a healthy context, it becomes cold-blooded, and so on and so forth. So those give us 3 valuable insights into the nature of this animal soul of ours. Number 1, it belongs to the world of Sitracha, which means by nature it pushes back against whatever it is that Hashem wants from us. Number 2, it's Kripas Noiga, which means that it has potential if you can get through all the layers and discover the potential within, and you can harness that potential, well, then it can give us great value and benefit. And its primary operating system is going to be linked to emotions and emotional responses, as we'll see in this chapter, and we'll see again later on in chapter 9. Now we're at the point where we're doing an analysis. We're going to say, okay, let's see. On this side, we have the neshama. The neshama is comprised of 10 soul powers, and it uses 3 garments in order to interface with the world. So we must now expect a similar system on this side. When we talk about the nefesh habahamis, the impulsive animal-like soul, we must expect a similar kind of thing. So let's look out. Will it have 10 faculties? And will it express itself through 3 modes of interface with the world? Let's take a look. So first of all, he tells us, Klula me'eser kisrin dimis avusa. So the first thing is, yes, just as there are 10 facets that comprise the neshama, the healthy divine soul, there are likewise 10 facets that comprise the impulsive, dangerous, animalistic soul. But look at the difference in language over here. When we describe the godly soul, we call the 10 faculties spheros. Spheros you could translate as spheres, faculties, stories, channels of communication, shining elements, all very positive connotations. And it's a Hebrew word. Hebrew, of course, is the holy language. When we describe the same kinds of faculties as they manifest in the animal soul, firstly we switch to Aramaic. Misavusa is an Aramaic word. That already tells you something. It tells us it's not holy. It's not described by the holy language. It's better described by a mundane language. Even though Aramaic and Hebrew are cousin languages, they derive from similar original sources. At the end of the day, that's a mundane language. Misavusa is the Aramaic term for impurity. So in Hebrew we'd call it tuma, and in Aramaic we call it misavusa. So that already tells you something. You've got eses spheros kedoshos. The makeup of the neshama is 10 holy elements, contrasted to the makeup of the animalistic soul, which is 10 impure elements. And then what's fascinating is that we call them kisrin de misavusa. Now, a keser is a crown, and kisrin is the Aramaic version of the plural. Crowns that are impure, which, of course, at first glance sounds totally paradoxical. What do you mean? How's a crown impure? Usually a crown is something which elevates a person, right? That you put a crown on somebody's head, they are no longer an ordinary citizen. They are now head and shoulders above everybody else. They're to be respected. They are royalty. So it is strange to use the word crown and associate it with the word impure. Doesn't sound right. Maybe we should have said it's the ball and chains of impurity, or we could have possibly said it was the hats of impurity if we want to insist that it's something which sits on top. Why a crown? So what's interesting is right throughout all of Jewish mysticism, whenever we talk about the concept of keser, of a crown, it has a very specific application. It could be a positive application, it could be a negative application. It depends on the context. But what's absolutely common and consistent right throughout is the application of the word crown. So let's stop for a moment. A human being obviously is comprised of all the elements of what make a human being: a mind and emotions and various other character traits that are not technically emotive, and the ability to think and the ability to speak and the ability to act. Put that all together and you get the anatomy of the human being, both the physical and the metaphysical anatomy of the human being. If a human being puts a crown on their heads, nobody would argue that the crown is part of the human being. Yeah, the crown will have a profound influence on the human being, but the crown is never part of the human being. In fact, the crown sits not only outside of the human body, but above the human body. It sits on top. And not only does it sit on top of the human body, but it specifically sits on top of the most developed part of the human body, the brain. So internally, here is the greatest part of the human, the brain. It is the most sophisticated. It's the part of us that distinguishes us from all other living organisms. It's the part that controls all the complexity of our system. It's the part that allows us to dream and to innovate and to transcend and to aspire. And the crown is even beyond that. That's why it sits on top. That's why the crown transforms the wearer, because it's something which is greater than the system. So it changes the nature of the whole system. Now, what would happen if we would put a crown onto the wrong person's head? You know what would happen? What would happen is we'd have a collapse of the system. So you take a person who's ill-suited to be a leader and you put a crown on their head, which in the modern world would be you vote them into office, and now you've got Soros. Somebody sent me a little video yesterday. It's a story of 3 animals that were debating which part of the world is the best place to emigrate, because of course animals also have to emigrate just like people do, right? So it was a chicken and a cow and a donkey. So the chicken says, I'm emigrating to China because the Asian countries have had so much avian flu, nobody's going to touch chickens, and I'll be safe if I go to Asia. Nobody's going to bother me. The cow says, I'm going to India because India, of course, holy cows, I'll be protected. Nobody can touch me. And the donkey says, I'm going to stay right here because I've learned that any donkey could be the president. So that's what happens when you put the crown on the wrong person, yes? You put the crown on the wrong person. Any donkey could be president. So what are we trying to say? Remember that the theme that we consistently use in Jewish mysticism to compare the forces of impure energy to the forces of holy energy is kekoif bifnei Adam. It's like an ape mimicking a human. The gestures might look the same. The movements might look the same. The interactions might look the same. But at the end of the day, that's not a human. It's a crown that gives some kind of credibility without actually having a meaningful impact on the ape. So dress an ape in a suit. I'm sure you remember that. What was that? The chimpanzee that they sent to space, right? So you put the chimpanzee into the space module and teach them basic functions. Okay, do this, push this button, whatever the case. Train it. It's brilliant. The chimpanzee does an amazing job of his mission, but he does not come back a human. So you give him the crown, but he doesn't become a human. There are 10 elements that comprise the nature and the faculties of this animal soul of ours, but they are all like a crown that is ill-fitted. It doesn't make, just because the soul, this animal soul, has these 10 faculties, does not make it into a neshama. Doesn't now transform and elevate it into the same or anywhere near the kind of soul that the divine soul is. And therefore it operates in exactly the same way as the godly soul, in reverse. So as I say, this is a concept we're going to introduce here, and we'll come back to this concept in chapter 9, and it will be the centerpiece of chapter 9. But effectively, it's the exact same process in reverse. Now, before we read what that process is, There's a wonderful example of this, and because we're coming up to the holiday of Shavuos, it's actually quite timely to use this particular example, where the Torah on 2 occasions describes incredible unity amongst people who maybe were not naturally inclined to be so united. One is at the foot of Mount Sinai, where the Torah tells us, Vayichan Sham Yisrael neged Hahar, that the nation camped, and even though it's describing a couple of million people, it uses the singular word for camp. They camped at the foot of the mountain. And the other is not long before that, when the Egyptians chased after them, when they had charota, as we say, when they regretted the fact that they allowed the Jews out, and they came chasing after them, headed towards the sea. There also, the Torah uses the expression that Mitzrayim nosea achareihem, in the singular, this massive army of Egyptians chasing after them, and yet the verb is singular. In both cases, there's absolute unity. And the way the sages describe that unity in both cases is exactly the same in reverse. When it describes the Jews at the foot of Mount Sinai, it says, Ke'ish echad, belev echad. They camped there as one person with one heart. When the sages describe how the Egyptians chased after the Jews to try to bring us back to Egypt, there it says, Belev echad, ke'ish echad. They chased us with one heart, like one person. The same process in reverse. Ze leumas ze. The way Hashem set up the system is that whatever exists on the one side, every force has an equal opposite force. A mirror image, where everything looks just a little bit off. Strange, something's not right. So in the reality of the neshama, the nefesh elokis, the divine soul, which is so healthy, the process is always from the top down. When we learned in chapter 3 that there are 10 facets to the neshama, we listed them from the top down. Chokhmah, then bina, then da'as. Then we spoke about the capacity for love of Hashem and for reverence of Hashem. Then we spoke about the capacity for feeling hisparos, as he called it, to speak about Hashem's beauty and grandeur. We worked from the top down. The Nefesh HaBahamis has 10 faculties that sound and look so similar, yet they operate in the opposite direction. Let's have a look. Shehein, in the reality of the animalistic impulsive soul, the 10 faculties work as follows. Sheva midois ro'ois. The first expression of this animalistic soul is to express 7 subjective or reactive, unhealthy responses, which which originate in the 4 categories which are associated with the 4 basic elements of all life, as they are in their unhealthy form, as we discussed in the first chapter. Remember, we spoke about the fact that anger and arrogance are associated with the element of fire, and the pursuit of pleasure with the element of water. And any meaningless pursuit, and there was a whole list of meaningless, boastfulness and speaking nonsense and wasting time, belong to the air element, and laziness and melancholy belong to the earth element. So when you actually put it all together, you'll end up seeing that there are 7 primary reactive, subjective responses that humans have. Right? We get angry, we get full of ourselves, we are tempted, we waste time, or we scoff at things of value, we get dragged down either by laziness or by melancholy. Those are the initial knee-jerk reactions of the Nefesh HaBahamis to life. In other words, the animal soul is this unpredictable pendulum. Get up in the morning, look outside, birds are chirping, the sky is blue, Nefesh HaBahamis is happy. Get up in the morning and you knock your toe as you get out of bed, Nefesh HaBahamis is unhappy. And the Nefesh HaBahamis can yo-yo right throughout the day. Somebody complimented me, I'm happy. Somebody cut me off in the traffic, I'm angry. I found the thing I was looking for in the shop. First try, I'm happy. There was a long line at the checkout. I'm frustrated. That's the nefesh habahamis. Sheva midos rois. It's 7 unhealthy, reactionary, subjective responses that are rooted in 4 different areas of unhealthy energy. Ve'seichel hamoilidon. And all of those, in order to function, they do require some kind of an intellectual process, because you can't react to something if there's been no brain activity, right? So there's got to be some kind of an intellectual process. Also, exactly as in the divine soul, split into 3 categories of intellect, and it's the exact same 3: chokhmah, bina, v'da'as. The same 3 processes: innovation, research, understanding, and expansion, and integration. Except that in the reality of this animalistic soul, they are mekoir hamidos. The primary role of the intellect is to facilitate personal reactions. Now that's a fundamental shift from the divine soul. The divine soul, what did we say? In chapter 3, when we described the chokhmah, bina, das, the 3 stages of intellectual process of the divine soul, we described a soul that was seeking, a soul that was looking for objective truth, a soul that wanted to meditate on the reality of God and creation and the soul in order to put it into perspective, in order to have something to aspire towards, to have something to love, to have something that is worth investing in. Whereas this nefesh habahamis, this animalistic, impulsive soul, it has a whole sophisticated intellect to rationalize, not to explore and understand, not to seek aspirational values, but to rationalize. Mekor hamidos. The entire intellectual process, as the nefesh habahamis would want to use it, would be to satisfy and to rationalize reactions and responses. So let's use this as an example. Great example, I think we could all relate to, is the example of that one person who we will have nothing to do with. Nothing at all. I'll have nothing. If you knew what that person is really like, everybody thinks that they're such a nice person and they keep getting honor in the community, but if you knew what they were really like, you would understand where I'm coming from. That's why I'll have absolutely nothing to do with them. So that's brilliant nefesh habahamis strategy, which basically says the whole reason I've thought about this was in order to be able to produce a particular response, a subjective response, which in this case is, I don't like that person, I don't want to have anything to do with them. If it was the nefesh elokis, the godly soul, that was operating the same assessment of this person, the process would work in the exact opposite way. Let me understand objectively, what would God want me to think about this person? How would God want me to look at this person? How would God want me to experience this person? And once I've worked to understand what that is, then I'll decide how I should respond subjectively. And so that's how we see that it's zeh leumas zeh. That the reality of this animalistic soul of ours is that it is the exact process as the godly soul, but in reverse. It's upside down. Starts things in an unhealthy way. And that's our first clue. Our first clue to what holiness is. Holiness is where a system runs in a healthy way as Hashem wants it to. Unholy is where a system runs as a system, and yet exactly not as Hashem would want it to. So there's a little bit more to talk about on this subject, about the relationship between the intellect and rationalizing the various subjective responses of the human experience, which we'll do, please God, next week. But at least now we have something to work with that we can understand. It's going to obviously develop as we learn further. The neshama versus the nefesh habahamis are going to be coming from completely opposite directions, and at some point they're going to clash in the middle, and all of life is about managing that clash and hopefully getting to the point where the godly soul is able to cultivate the animal soul to be much healthier than it would be if left to its own devices. Okay, so that's what we'll continue next time, please.